はい、皆さんこんにちは。Thinkers チャンネルへようこそ。本日2022年10月17日月曜日になりました。皆さんいかがお過ごしでいらっしゃいますでしょうか。こっちはですね、私が住んでいるところは快晴でですね、とてもいいお天気になっております。皆さんどのような秋を過ごしていらっしゃいますでしょうか。今回はですね、都市伝説好きにはとても、興味深い内容なんじゃないかなと思うんですけれども、皆さんビル・ライアンさんご存知でいらっしゃいますでしょうか。おそらく知っている方もいらっしゃるかもしれないんですけれども、この方はですね、11年前に残した、YouTube ビデオでとても話題になっていてですね、567ウイルスの、ことをちょっとが起こるよっていうようなことを実は11年前に言っていたよというような内容の動画がですね、拡散されていたりとかして、1年前ぐらい、私が知ったのは2020年の、3月2月3月ぐらいですかね。それぐらいに見たんですけども、今でもですね拡散されていたりしているんですけども、彼が残した別のビデオがありまして、私がですねちょっと見たことなかったので、みんなもちょっと見てないかなと思ってですね、一応日本語に翻訳をして、シェアしてみようかなというふうに思ったんですけども、この内容もですねすごく現実と捉えられる方、捉えられない方いらっしゃると思うんですけれども、見ていただければわかるんですけれども、このビデオを見てみんな一人一人がどういうふうに考えるか、どういうふうに思うかというのの刺激になればなというふうに思いまして、シェアさせていただくこととします。それではどうぞ。
And it's Sunday the 9th of January 2011, and I'm making this little video with the help of my friend Ruth with a question and answer session.
Would you like to tell again how you met Charles?
Okay. He emailed me with brevity and courtesy and suggested that it would be valuable for me to talk to him. I picked up the importance of the message, and on the 1st of August we talked on Skype for 4 hours. It was one of the more extraordinary conversations in my life. And he introduced himself by saying that he had been ordered to deal with me because I had become a problem. And then he said that he wasn't going to do as he was ordered, and instead he was going to support what I was doing because he'd found out a little bit about who I was. And once again, the story of that is told in the interview. We met eventually on the 18th of December.
Before you met him in person, you spoke to him quite some time.
Oh yeah, we logged over several months, over 30 hours of Skype conversations as a resource for them. His job was to make problems go away. He would probably smile when I said that he's the kind of person who one would be glad to have on one's side when faced with a problem or any kind of a situation. He is intelligent. He does not have a formal education. He's not an academic. He's not a historian. He's not a scientist. He was a resource. He was an asset of the controlling group and spent many years attending meetings. He was in the room where the decisions were made by the global controllers about. He was trusted. He's smart. He's cautious about what he says. He's honest. He has shown to me that he keeps his word. I would say he's tremendously courageous, and I would say that he's one of these people who one could describe probably quite accurately as being uncontrollable.
Does Charles have any special abilities, like psychic abilities?
He's got some remarkable psychic abilities, very strong psychic abilities, which I've experienced at first hand, and others who he's been in communication with have experienced as well. It does seem like of the insiders, who you could call the insiders, some of them insiders in intelligence, we've encountered this before, and some of them in the bloodline families, they have these abilities, they have psychic powers. Charles says this is nothing special. It's just a natural process. It's a natural thing that everyone's got. but the public have been educated to believe that these things are unreal, they're imaginary, they're somehow kind of new agey mumbo jumbo and they're to be laughed at, and they are not. They're used as tools of the trade by the insiders and by people in Charles's role, which is a kind of quasi-military role. They use these abilities.
So in that case, he would be a perfect person for some kind of intelligence group or any organization who need a person with special abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. We know, for example, that the Russians and the Americans have spent billions of dollars on research programs trying to enhance people's abilities for remote viewing, remote influencing. There's all the work that was done by Hal Puthoff and company in the Stanford Research Institute in the 1970s with Uri Geller and Ingo Swann. All of this is very well documented in the public domain. But when you've got somebody who's already a bloodline member, as Charles is, and who has these abilities, he was born with these abilities, and so they use these resources that they have available to them. That's why, one of the reasons why he was inducted into their world, not only because he was a warrior, and because he was smart and capable, and he was able to make their problems go away for them, but also because of his abilities that, as he described, often prevented problems from rising in the first place. And that's better than having a fight on your hands.
So we could actually say that he didn't have a chance to choose a different way in his life. He was brought up in this tradition, so to speak.
He was singled out from a very early age when he was a kid. He'd been watched all the time. He didn't realize what was happening until he was into his late teens and 20s. That's when he realized that there was more to him than he knew, but other people had been watching him all the time. In the meantime, in his world, were noticed and taken advantage of.
Why did he suddenly decide to work together with you?
Yeah, this is a critical question. As he describes in his interview, he had a certain experience which effectively deprogrammed him, but he woke up and he thought, wait a minute, I don't have to do all this stuff mindlessly that they're asking me to do. I'm my own man and I can make my own decisions. And that's what he started to do. Now, he didn't announce it to them straight away. That became clear when he was asked to contact me to deal with me because I was a problem. And then he didn't do as he was asked. That's when everything changed.
So, behind Charles, there is some kind of a group. Could you make it easier to understand for people who these people are?
Yeah, he had spent a lot of time in the room where the decisions were made by what effectively is the capstone of the pyramid. This is not the Illuminati, it's not the Freemasons, it's not the Rosicrucians, it's not the Skull and Bones. It's a group that's senior to all of that has no name. And it consists of the senior bloodline representatives. The senior representatives are chosen on a particular criterion, and I don't know what that criterion is, of the 33 major bloodlines that are on the inside. And you can regard them as families. You can regard them as families who know what's going on. Charles said that they've been in control of the planet pretty much for 17,000 years. And this group is an international group based in the UK, is the group that is calling the shots. They have tremendous power, tremendous wealth. They've had this power and this wealth for a very long time, and they are senior to every other group. It's the controlling group, as best I understand it. And these are the people who Charles has reported to and who has worked with and who knows in person. It's as senior as it gets while you stay on this planet.
I would like to know a little bit more about this group. Are these the same beings always incarnating in the same bloodline, or how can I understand this?
But in all the conversations we've had, and we've talked about a lot of stuff, what people could call the spiritual aspect of this, or the aspect of who we are and who they are as immortal beings temporarily occupying bodies, that was not discussed. The emphasis from Charles's viewpoint, and it would seem from the controlling group viewpoint, is it's all about DNA, it's all about bodies, it's all about bloodlines, and ultimately it's all about eugenics.
So it has never been expressed if they understand themselves as spiritual beings.
This has never been discussed. That's all I can say. My personal opinion is that I'm sure that they do. I know from conversations with Charles, from personal conversations with him, that he is well aware that he's an immortal spiritual being temporarily occupying a body. He's this is obvious to him, he knows this.
Yeah.
Just as many people watching this video know this. But he's never talked about how this fits in to the scenario and the plans and the philosophy and the operating modus operandi, the principles, how they work of the insiders.
These people who belong to this controlling group, are they at all known in the open?
No. Charles did not tell me their names. I did not ask for their names. And there's an important reason for that. At one point, Charles was actually tempted to tell me one or two names, although they wouldn't actually have meant anything to me. These are not people in the public domain. These are people who are very, very hidden. And we were very well aware that everything that we were talking about was being monitored and listened to. Of course it was. I said, don't tell me any names. I don't need to know. It wouldn't mean anything. It's more important to understand why they're doing what they're doing, to understand their thinking, to understand their philosophy, to understand their rationale, to understand the nature of the game that's being played. I didn't want to get personal. And I wanted to show that I didn't want to get personal as an indication of the fact that I wanted to play the game that way. There are ancient protocols. There are principles and rules of engagement in place that, in my view, is very smart to recognize. And so I haven't wanted to tread on their toes. I haven't wanted to insult them. I haven't wanted to interfere with their personal affairs. But as a group, as an operating group like the board of directors of Corporation Planet Earth, I wanted to establish a dialogue, and I wanted to show them that I was maybe what Charles called in his interview with me, a worthy contestant. In other words, somebody who they feel that they can do business with, who can be trusted, who's not going to badmouth them, who's not going to break his word, and who can act as what word to use, as a negotiating representative of the alternative community, who are the only community who really are aware of what's happening. They're aware of some of what's happening and justifiably concerned about what's happening. And so the opportunity to open up a dialogue was what was really important to me.
So let's go back these, let's say, 17,000 years. What started at that moment?
Oh, well, 17,000 years is recent history. One of the first things that Charles explained to me was that, in his own words, the human race is an experiment. You could regard it as a project, but basically it's a created situation set up on planet Earth as the ideal environment where several hominid species were established on this planet, and Charles thinks that this was about 1 million years ago. He's not a historian or an anthropologist, but that's what he understood. And then the initiators of the project stepped back to allow these humanoids, these early humanoids, to breed with each other, to handle things, to sort things out, to evolve and develop, uninterfered with. They stepped back and let this ball roll. And there seems to be a genetic experiment or a genetic project. And the outcome seems to be something to do with the optimization of DNA or the optimization of the genome that has evolved in a natural way. And there's some kind of principle or protocol in place here that rather than create something to design in an advanced laboratory, assuming that this is possible, they're allowing this DNA, our DNA, the human genome, to evolve and to optimize itself under natural conditions over a long period of time, using planet Earth as the petri dish, as it were. A petri dish is just a little sort of controlled environment in a laboratory where little bugs are grown. And I'm not saying that humans are little bugs, I'm just saying that it's a controlled environment in which changes take place and then they're observed and they're monitored. And it's all with an outcome in mind. Now, Charles doesn't know who the ET originators of this situation were, but they're doing this for a reason. They're doing this because of some purpose that they had, some goal that they had, or some problem that they were trying to solve. And the current controlling group, because you asked about the 17,000 year thing, this is very, very recent. This is just like the last 5 minutes of the day, you know. That controlling group has come to the top of the pile on planet Earth in a natural way. Like in business, if all is fair in love, war and business, then they have risen to the top. A lot of this is about controlling power and it's about controlling wealth. And because they've risen to the top and they feel that they have deserved it, this justifies it for them. Because they are also in possession of the history. This history exists in artifacts and documents in the Vatican Library and elsewhere. It's not in the public domain, but they have it. They know this stuff. They know the history of the human race. And they regard themselves as being the guardians, as doing a responsible job. They see themselves, like the chief executives of a corporation, as being responsible for the survival of the corporation, for the optimization of the product that that corporation creates, the management structure of planet Earth, on behalf of the experimenters. That's how they see their role. There's a very sensitive issue here. Now, I'm not trying to justify anything, I'm reporting it. But just like in the way that a corporate board of directors thinks about a big corporation when there are too many workers and the corporation is no longer efficient, then they let people go. They let some of the workforce go to get the whole thing leaner and meaner and more efficient. So they care about the company, but they don't care about the workers. And I believe that that is a rough analogy. And they would say, we care about the human genome, but we don't care about individuals. That's not our job.
Where does this stand in comparison to everything that David Icke says? Where are the other groups, like the reptilians, the Anunnaki, call them whatever you want? Where are they? They also have their intentions. They also have their power games. Is there anything said about this?
The only intelligent thing I can say about this is that there are many groups, there are many factions, there are many agendas. There's a lot of compartmentalization. And in my personal view, there are likely to be off-planet influences, maybe astral, non-physical influences, which are way beyond the intentions of the group of ETs that actually started this experiment or started this project. There are lots of other things going on. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. I think it's a massive complexity. I do not have the details. Charles does not have the details. there are a whole bunch of questions which I've got which have not been answered, and those few questions that you table there are among them.
But we can assume that there are many, many groups, and very soon we come to the point where we try to differentiate, or it's in the nature of humans to differentiate between good and bad. Who is the good one? Who is the bad guy?
It's a difficult subject. This is the kind of conversation that's really hard to have because everyone gets upset about it. Let's just be God for a moment. And I don't mean that sacrilegiously. Let's just take the highest viewpoint we possibly can do. We're looking at over all of creation, okay? And this is possible for humans just to adopt that viewpoint for a little bit. Some people do it in meditation. When one's out of the game looking in on it, when you're out of the fishbowl looking in on it, when you're out of the movie looking back on it, good and bad are kind of temporary artificial constructs, okay? And ultimately what you've got is you've got spirituality doing its thing, you've got beings playing games, you've got people solving problems, you've got all kinds of drama and theatre, and you've got the whole movie, if you like. And so sometimes it can be helpful to think in terms of good and bad, and sometimes it's not helpful to think in terms of good and bad. And let me enlarge on that a little bit, because I think this is important, if I can find a way of making the point. Since the first video was released, there's a lot of anger has been triggered, and I understand that. It's like now that people have got a target for their anger. Some of the anger is against Charles, some of it is against me. It's like, how can you talk to this guy? You know, he's working for the dark side. This is the sort of Star Wars analogy. How can you dialogue with these people? How can you even represent them? How can you try and explain what it is that they're doing or why? How can you even be talking like this on camera? How dare you? You're betraying us. All of this kind of stuff. And that's not productive. I can understand that kind of reaction, but it's not productive. Because fighting doesn't work. It really doesn't work. All that does is it just precipitates us into the next situation, and we've got to fight about that, and so on and so forth. At some point, you've got to step outside of this fishbowl, and you've got to say, look, we're all in this together. One of the most important things that happened in South Africa, for example, after apartheid, that was a sort of microcosm equivalent of a lot of the larger, more nasty things that have been happening on planet Earth. There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that said, okay, we're not trying to punish anybody here, but we've got a kind of amnesty, but the truth has to be told. And the truth has to be told in order to let it go. And this is the way in which I regard this question about good and bad. It's like, look, we can sit in judgment all we like, but it might not help change the situation. It might alter the situation in various ways, but it's not going to transform the situation. And to transform the situation, we've got to get above dualistic thinking. We've got to get above creating an enemy and fighting it, because that won't work. It really won't work. We have to set up, establish or create or envision the kind of global equivalent of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Forget about the good and bad. What have we got? Who are we? Where are we? What resources do we have? What do we know? Let's all tell the truth and let's fix this situation. People are very, very remarkable. The human race is remarkable. I suspect that the extraterrestrials understand that there's something very remarkable that's being created in this human genome. And I often have wondered, I've asked questions that I haven't seen asked elsewhere, like the extraterrestrials out there with their extraordinary advanced technology and their mental abilities and their spiritual capacity. But do they dance? Do they climb mountains? Do they do acrobatics? Do they have skateboarding competitions? Do they have comedy? Do they have their own version of Mozart and Da Vinci and Rembrandt? We don't know the answer to these questions, but the human race can be very, very terrible, but the human race can be remarkably wonderful in extraordinary ways. And I personally speculate whether there's something here in the human genome that is regarded as extraordinary and maybe even unique. Those very traits that make us so extraordinary also contribute to making us dangerous and unpredictable in some ways, because we express ourselves in such remarkable ways, and sometimes we express ourselves violently and thoughtlessly. What I'm talking about here is how remarkable the human race is, how we all have to work together, how this is the commonality that we've got. And I think that slipping into a good, bad, judgmental paradigm doesn't help us here. We have to be the change that we want to see in the world, which is what Gandhi said. And that means that if we want to see a better world, we have to start behaving in a way that's representative of that world. So I don't want judgment, I don't want retribution, I don't want more fighting, but I do want understanding. And it's towards that understanding that I published that video on the 1st of January, and I'm also publishing this.
I would like to go back now to the controlling group and to their intentions. It is expressed that they are only interested in DNA. In certain situations, the beings learn to take responsibility. The beings become creative. The beings become violent. The beings become loving and caring. These